War I, the Spanish influenza outbreak that swept the population was inevitable and fatal. Also known as the Spanish pandemic, the Spanish influenza originated from Europe and Asia. The plague rapidly spread across worldwide, causing hundreds of thousands of deaths. From 1880 to 1920, the Spanish plague was thought to either be typhoid, tuberculosis, cholera, or malaria, until it was identified as Pfeiffer's bacillus. This bacterium was identified as the supposed cause of influenza by Robert Friedrich Pfeiffer, a leading German scientist. In the early 1918s, this illness was brought to attention by the Public Health Service, who then warned the public about this innate disease. In May of 1918, the symptoms of the disease were emerging in soldiers from Europe. Although a handful of the sick recovered, those who didn't reported having a more serious and deadly type. In a matter of months, the disease spread from military forces to communities. As time progressed, the disease multiplied and reached Asia, Africa, South America, and North America. With the war and a new outbreak at hand, the entire world was oblivious to what they had coming.
One by one, individuals were highly infected by this contagious disease. The killer disease was spreading at an alarming rate, especially relying on war for it to spread. Transportation was highly important during warfare, so the Spanish flu took advantage of it, using it as a free ride to infect more victims. Once a single soldier was infected, all it really took was a cough on another soldier for both of them to be in the will of the flu. Eventually, with numerous soldiers infected by the disease, it was ought to believe that the enemies were using this as a new weapon of warfare. However, the reason why soldiers were mainly infected was because of their malnourishment. Therefore, the Spanish flu took advantage of the soldiers with a low immune system. The pandemic was known for its 3 deadly waves. The first wave took place in the United States in 1918. America was fighting against its rival, Germany. In the heat of war, the Americans sent out a number of troops, but what they didn't know was that the troops were bringing the virus along with them. Men feared rifles when they should have been fearing the disease. As troops were being sent back and forth, the flu continued to grow and kill. Multiple cases of illnesses were continuously reported worldwide. The second and third waves of the influenza were the most fatal and happened during fall and winter of 1918 to 1919. The following waves were violent and were without warning. The spread of the second wave originated from sailors returning from Boston. Then, soldiers riding along overcrowded trains began infecting others, civilians. On September 28, 1918, Philadelphians gathered for a Liberty Loan parade. What they didn't know was that they carried the virus along with them. Within a month after the gathering, the pandemic took effect on 12,000 Philadelphian citizens. The flu had the world in its grip, and the world had to do something about it fast.
The soldiers had something much worse to fear than their enemy, the plague. Nearly 50% of soldiers fighting in the war died to the plague. In the United States alone, 600,000 lives were taken by the pandemic. The pandemic's main hosts were people between the ages of 20 to 40, while 1% of the infected were above the age 65. People infected with the plague showed symptoms such as a sore throat, exhaustion, headaches, aching limbs, bloodshot eyes, a cough, and occasionally a violent nosebleed. The flu disabled its victims in a matter of hours, then killing them within a day. In total, the deadly plague had a toll of 50 million deaths worldwide. In a year, the Spanish flu killed more people than the Black Plague killed in a century. Not only did the flu lead to a mass amount of deaths, but damaged the economy. Small businesses went bankrupt, and workers paid more attention to their health rather than their jobs. For the stores that were kept open, they eventually required customers to leave orders outside. Furthermore, the decline of food supply followed the loss of workers. This led to starvation, another cause of worldwide death. Worst of all, care wasn't available when people needed it in the most. As wounded soldiers returned from war in need of medical assistance, they were brought to the harsh reality that hospitals were shut down due to the outbreak.
The Spanish flu changed people's way of life. In the late 19th century, scientists barely began to understand that diseases like this were caused by microorganisms. It was especially difficult for physicians to diagnose their patients that had this disease due to the uncommon symptoms they were showing. The Public Health Service began looking for a vaccine, but not even drugs could rid of this disease. Gauze masks were publicly distributed in order to prevent the disease from further spreading. However, they couldn't effectively contain the disease. The public was then forced to worry about the dead. Funerals were limited to 15 minutes in length, and hospitals became filled so quickly that there were not enough doctors. So medical students were forced out of school and into hospitals as nurses. It was difficult for the world to keep up with the pandemic since the disease was spreading rapidly. For those who were sick, doctors, folk healers, or nurses would show up to your home. However, during this century, doctors didn't know much about how to treat influenza. Hence, they incorrectly diagnosed a handful of patients. Of course, the Spanish influenza of 1918 had detrimental effects on society, but would the studies of sciences and life be the same without this deadly plague? Moreover, would the influenza itself have been as lethal if it weren't for World War I? The answer is no. The First World War was not only responsible for 17 million deaths, but for the transport of the virus from different countries. Because of its quick movement from different parts of the world, the Spanish influenza caused more deaths than the World War itself.